Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today, we take a closer look at Arthur Smith's offense and what we got note-wise from the first preseason game. Also, with an extensive talk with him, as you can see the scrum we had with Arthur Smith just a few days ago at Steelers training camp. All here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. Thank you for making us your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today's episode are brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook is the number one sportsbook in America. And right now, FanDuel is hooking up all customers. They boost or a bonus every single day, all summer long. That's right. There's something for everyone. New customers, returning customers, all summer long. Go to FanDuel.com to get started. All right, Steelers fans. So I did say we were hoping to get Matt Williamson. His schedule is always really busy because that man is on 1,000 shows. So we had to reschedule with him. We'll try to get him on either later this week or sometime next week. But I want to talk with you guys about Arthur Smith and notes that I had on the offense. Now, you guys have heard me talk about Trey Faltanu, Zach Frazier, a little bit about Justin Fields, but now I want to take a closer look at a few things that Arthur Smith is trying to do with the offense, at least as far as the early notes that we've seen. And one thing that I said immediately after the game, I love the play action. I thought we saw that. We saw the impact of it. I've said that all throughout training camp. And I think that we saw a more composed version of Justin Fields, or at least a sign of the more composed version of Justin Fields than what I was expecting to see if you had asked me just a few weeks ago when I was first seeing him at training camp, or from what I'd seen with him at the Bears. And I think that those are good signs of where Arthur Smith's offense could go. Now, granted, as Arthur Smith has noted, as Mike Tomlin has noted, as the Steelers, basically the whole offense has noted, they cannot afford the mistakes that they had. The quarterback center exchanges, I have seen like 5 different arguments on both sides about why it was the center's fault, why it was the quarterback's fault. Again, as I've said, as a guy that used to play center in high school, my coach always told me, shout out to Coach Schmidt, by the way, it doesn't matter, who got it wrong. If there's a fumble in the center and the quarterback exchange, you both got it wrong, and it needs to be fixed. That's something that needs to happen. But that's something that we also know Justin Fields doesn't struggle with. The biggest thing was the question was, how would he process the field? How would he look over things? And as we get into Arthur Smith, I wanted to kind of use that as my segue, because I want you to listen to this early response from Arthur Smith, because I thought this was very interesting. Live, when he starts talking about it here, I thought he was talking about the offensive line. But no, Arthur Smith, I think, saw someone's analysis of Justin Fields in the first preseason game and did not like it at all and felt it was inaccurate. And just listen to how he addresses that, and then he'll go into other things here. But I thought that was very interesting, because I'm like, coaches normally don't care what people or analysts are saying online about X's and O's and stuff. In fact, they say like, who cares about that kind of stuff? But this sounded like he didn't. So here's about 5 minutes of Arthur Smith in our scrum yesterday, picking apart some of the answers that he gave us so that you can listen to it. But I want you to hear that response, and then we'll delve into other things he says and how I think it plays into where I think the Steelers offense can go. But without further ado, here's Arthur Smith, Steelers offensive coordinator.
Obviously, there were those self-inflicted wounds in Justin's series, but what did you like about those 3 series that he was out there for?
Yeah, I thought he was decisive. He was able, I thought he threw a great ball to Van. Some things, regardless of whoever gets online and tries to break things down and know what's what, one thing is shared accountability with the protections, the route depths, winning versus man. There's a lot of things that can be true in one play, and we got to continue to improve. But I thought, we got our own way. I thought he operated pretty well, and there were some things we also wanted to work. That's a fine line. Some people want to be too vanilla in the preseason. Other people trying to set things up. We got to work on things. We leaned heavy into the screen game. That was intentional to get those reps live. It'd be maybe a different theme depending on how we decided in the week against Buffalo. So you're working multiple things. But I thought, other than the CQ issues, again, it doesn't matter whose fault it is. They happen. We got to get cleaned up on. As a quarterback center, we can't have that. But other than that, I thought he operated pretty well.
How do you coach the quarterbacks go for it versus protect the ball? I mean, throw a 50-50 ball versus don't throw an interception? How do you handle the thin line there?
That is, and those are things we try to be aggressive in practice. I mean, you want to be smart but not reckless. We have a lot of team speed, and so we've tried to push the ball down the field. You guys have watched a lot of practices, and yeah, what you can't have happen is late poor decisions. You get into these spot drop zones and you're late, and those guys break on the ball. We got 50-50 balls, especially certain guys we have. We want to see them give them a chance. There's risk in every play, but when we have the speed we have, and certainly guys like George that can go get the ball. We definitely times we certainly want to err on the side of being more aggressive.
And
With
you
that-
put all based on what the defense is doing, or are there times where you'll say,
Well,
Joe
yeah,
Smith's getting the
you're
ball
playing
here?
percentages. Those are the things. If anybody gets up here and says, "Oh, I know exactly what they're going to be," well, they may be 80%, but they have a say in it too, and they game plan. So you're also working in progressions and answers. But if we get the looks, we've got the green light, and so that's what we're trying to push these guys, and it also fits with our overall philosophy with the personnel we have.
I'm sorry, man. What did you see from Troy in the game? What did you?
Yeah, well, all three of those rookies, lights weren't too big for him on the first snaps. Troy, I didn't even realize, he had an injury because he kept playing and he just asked for a knee brace. So at least he got thankfully he'll be all right. But it shows who he really is when you get in those moments. And I thought all three of those guys wasn't perfect, but they played well. They, exactly what we thought they were when we drafted them. It was good to see.
Jeff
You
said-
asked a question about the wide receivers that you were asked.
Mhm.
Over your time, be it in Tennessee or Atlanta, I know that you've been very tight end reliant. You use a lot of tight ends. You lean into the run game. How important is a second wide receiver in your offense?
Well, every year is different. I mean, there's some years. I mean, if you feel like you've got a strong group, there may be weeks you may be short two guys. So you're trying to develop and get the best personnel groups, and a lot of it's matchup based. Things we want to attack the defense, and we think maybe their weaknesses, we have an advantage. And some weeks it may be different. They may be pretty salty in the run, and you may not want to get them in a lot of base, and you may want to spread them out. But any amount of great players, it's our job to figure it out. And you just have to have contingency plan. Same thing at tackle. As you're trying to get your top 8, well, you may have certain guys that may be in one position. You may have a guy that can actually do both. And, in the perfect world, you love your third tackle to play both, but that's not the issue. And you've got a starter that can do both. So those are things you're trying to problem solve. And the same thing with the skill positions. Guys get more comfortable in it. You never know. A guy may have to be elevated from practice squad, and it may be the tight end's better than the fifth wide receiver. And so that's kind of carries week to week.
Do you feel like you have enough there after George right
All
now?
I worry about is who I have. Those are the things. Like, there's a practicality. It's a lot of wasted energy, and everybody would love to have the perfect roster. That just doesn't exist. And so you just deal with what the reality is. And they, like I said, I'll coach whoever they bring in here. It's our job, and my job, more importantly, to worry about the guys that are here and try to put them in the best
How
spot.
much has Zach Frazier grown in what you've been able to ask from him at center?
A lot,
How much further does he have to grow to be the starter?
Well, sometimes it's not just about Zach. I mean, we've got a good depth in the line room. There aren't any more injuries. So I think Zach's had a terrific camp. But, credit to Nate and some of these other veteran linemen. It was cool. Spencer Anderson, I thought, stepped up the other night. And continue to see that. That's a good problem to have when you've got good depth, and it's hard to pick who your 8 are on game day. But been very pleased with all the rookies. And like I said, sometimes it gets expedited. You may not have somebody in front of them that's playing well, or there may be an injury, but it'll all play itself out. And, that is a little bit of a challenge when you've got multiple quarterbacks. You don't have a quote-unquote coming into camp. Everybody's new. With the line, you're mixing and matching. So those guys have handled that. Some years you'd love to have everybody back, but you've always got to develop the second and third lines, because the reality is you'd love to have everybody for 17-plus games, and that's usually doesn't happen.
So a lot of different things Arthur Smith touched on there. We're going to touch on it both here and on the next segment, so stick around because I have different thoughts on several things. But I want to dip back into that early part where I talked about he was kind of making notes about criticism with the film study. That is very intriguing to me because that shows Arthur Smith listening to stuff that's getting said around. And maybe that's also because the Steelers are being mindful of their quarterbacks and what their perceptions might be, because they know that, hey, things didn't go well for the last crop of quarterbacks that they brought in. In fact, all 3 of them are gone now, and Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, and Mason Rudolph. And maybe they're being a little bit more careful. I know Arthur Smith wasn't part of that, but maybe the Steelers are being more mindful of stuff like that for him to defend him. I think, I tweeted out that exact quote earlier on Tuesday because I was going back through it preparing for the show, and I wanted to cut up the parts of the scrum that I thought would be good to share. And when I went back and found this, and I was, I went and saw that clip, and I was like, oh yeah, he was talking about like analysts on the internet. So I thought that was interesting that he would step out and defend Justin like that. Whereas like normally, a Mike Tomlin or, anybody, even back in the Todd Haley, before Matt Canada, like Todd Haley, I don't think I recall them stepping out and saying things like that in response to because their whole thing is, who cares about those guys? We care about us and everything like that. So I thought that was interesting. But I also want to dip into the parts where he talked about being aggressive with the ball, because I think that says a lot about what they want to do with this offense and how they want to balance things. We'll have that and more on the Locked On Steelers podcast next here. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. Still got a lot to cover. But first, I want to remind you, this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. I love sports, and there's plenty of action going on right now that you can tap into with FanDuel, the app you can download right to your phone or go to their website, FanDuel.com. Right now, Major League Baseball is still in full swing. They're getting ready to start getting into the final month of the regular season in September, but also the WNBA is set to return with the Olympics being over, and there's always big fights that you can take advantage of when you go on FanDuel. And right now, FanDuel is helping you take advantage of things because they are offering all customers a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right, all customers, not just new customers, not just returning customers, but every single person who goes on FanDuel Sportsbook right now and on FanDuel.com can see a boost or a bonus all day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com today and start making the most out of your summer. And that's FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our episode here on Wednesday on the Locked On Steelers podcast. By the way, today is the last day of Latrobe training camp. I'll be out there with my colleagues, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, gathering information. So stay tuned for all that updates throughout the week. And of course, Thursday, tomorrow, is the scrimmage that they'll have with the Bills. It's done privately, so we'll be able to see what that's like. I expect to be there as well. We'll talk about that. But anyways, let's look. I wanted to delve more into what Arthur Smith said in the last clip that I played you, the 5-minute cut up or so, and that I showed in the first segment. I want to dip into one of the last things that he touched on about the receiver situation, because people have been poking about that, like, hey, the Brandon Aiyuk talks are going on right now. What do you feel about your current receiver room? I liked this response that he had. The perfect roster doesn't exist. This is a quote. Perfect roster doesn't exist. You have to deal with reality. And I like that specifically because it's an acknowledgement that's like, hey, I'm not dissing my players, but everyone knows that, like, there's not an established superstar number 2 guy. The Steelers wide receiver room is one of the, is if you're looking at weaknesses on the team, it might be the weakest overall unit going into the season as far as, what expectations are. It's an acknowledgement of their shortcoming, but it's not saying that he's, doomed to not be able to do anything about it. I think that we saw interesting uses of Van Jefferson in week 1. Or in week 1 of the preseason, the way that he was being used in play action, the way he was getting open, I think that those were solid. Calvin Austin's a speedster, and we'll get into his speed in a second, because I think his speed and the aggressiveness that Arthur Smith was talking about there plays a role. But again, we've seen the Steelers work around not having a supreme number 2 wide receiver for several years, especially in the years of Ben Roethlisberger. They were able to do stuff like that. And there's other teams out there too. I mean, there's been years where the Kansas City Chiefs haven't had a number 2 wide receiver that's been all that to really shake a stick at. And so, and I know Patrick Mahomes is a whole different demon of a player, but again, like I think that when you look at the strength of this Steelers team, it's not going to be about throwing the ball to a whole bunch to 2 top receivers that get all the jobs done by themselves. It's going to be about a balanced offensive attack that involves the tight end, that involves George Pickens, that involves Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, and then still tries to mix in other guys in roles there. And I think that that's fine there, especially if they run the ball. So again, that gets back into, I don't think the Steelers are necessarily jumping again out of their shoes to go get a number 2 superstar wide receiver like Brandon Aiyuk if it costs way too much. And with that, we're going to talk about the newest news about Brandon Aiyuk, and that there's no new news. I don't care what Ian Rappaport tweets. I don't care what anybody tweets. What we know is that the Steelers have put in an offer to the Niners. The Niners know that offer's there. They're trying to negotiate with Brandon Aiyuk. That's it. Nothing else. I don't care how many people want to reword what's going on here. There's no done deal. If the deal was done, the deal would be announced, and Brandon Aiyuk would be in Pittsburgh, and I'd be interviewing him at the scrums at training camp. But it's not done until we actually see it get done. So I'm just going to leave it there because I'm tired of talking about it. I know a lot of people are tired of hearing about it, but I'm just going to address that there so that no one's like, why didn't you talk about Ian Rappaport's tweet? I don't care. It's not anything new. When there is something new, I'll let you know. Anyways, back to my Arthur Smith notes here. I thought there were a few different things that were also really interesting to talk about because he talked about the aggression in the offense and taking the shots. And I love the way that he put this because I think this encapsulates what's the method of taking the deep shot, of when you do it. Because deep shots aren't necessarily always just, oh, that guy happened to be open, let's just throw it. It's you want it to be by design, because what Arthur Smith is doing, and what I thought I saw done well when Justin Fields targeted downfield in this first preseason game, he's putting the offense in situations where they can anticipate certain matchups to get one-on-ones or specific zone looks where it's going to be a simple read where if Justin Fields or Russell Wilson, because again I think he's still going to be QB1, with whoever's your quarterback, as long as their eyes are where they're supposed to be and the rhythm of the play still intact and the route hasn't been completely blown up, it's going to put the quarterback in a position where, as he said, it's going to be done on time. He said the key to avoiding bad 50-50 balls or bad deep shots or bad risks there is not being late, not making poor decisions. And I think part of that is pulling the trigger and having the confidence to pull this trigger within the structure of the play. That's where they're going to design up those plays. And that, again, feeds back into needing the run game to take off. You didn't see the Steelers' run game in the first couple of drives when they were out there. But when you saw them start to get it going, that opened up other options in the offense because the defense had to start coming up to the line of scrimmage a bit faster, and that opened up play action. And play action is another way to orchestrate, hey, if everything's on time, you're getting your shot. You only have to look at one or two things. And if what you like's there, let it fly, put the ball in the right place, and let your playmaker wide receivers get after it. And I know that, again, the Steelers don't have some superstar number 2 wide receiver, but Calvin Austin can get behind somebody fast. We've seen it. He has that speed. And it's things like that I think can absolutely be part of the Steelers offense, on top of George Pickens and on top of Van Jefferson, and heck, on top of Pat Freiermuth. He's not a speedster, but he's another guy that can beat you deep. So I think those are things that we're going to still see worked into the Steelers offense. And as Arthur Smith also said in that clip there, he talked about how they were leaning on the screen game a little bit because they wanted to work on it. If you've watched the Steelers the past, I don't know how many years, they have sucked at executing screen passes. And when I've seen that, I've been like, man, that's a persistent problem. They need to fix that. And so I think it was a bit of a prove it. And they did well with screen passes. They had some that was really working out. And I think it was a sign, okay, there's something there. Now we can move on. I think whatever the Steelers are about to show you in this next preseason game is going to be the next step of, hey, let's check some boxes. Let's do these things, these concepts that we've been working on. Let's see it live in a stadium to show, like, okay, this is something that we can lean on in key parts of the game. This is a strength, or this is something we have to work on, improve on. I think that's where Arthur Smith's mind is with there. And I think it's totally fine that the Steelers are taking that kind of approach on things. So all things considered, I think Arthur Smith is, the offense is still on track to be a much better offense than it was last year. Again, I think they embrace it. I do think in this next preseason game, this offensive line needs to run off the ball. They need to go up. They need to push people around. They need to create space. You want to see Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, somebody pounding the rock, getting into the end zone, or pounding the rock and setting someone else up to catch a pass in the end zone and make it happen that way. I think you do want to see that kind of progress, and without the hiccups of, holding penalties or botched snaps or anything like that. So I think if you see that kind of step forward in the second game, that'll be a good sign that Arthur Smith has the offense on track. We'll keep you up to date with all that there, and we'll see what we see on the last day of Latrobe training camp for the Steelers today when I'm out there. But I also want to talk about the defense. That I would be remiss if we didn't, because there's some interesting things that I wanted to go over. Just my notes of going back over the All-22 film, things that I saw. We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I remind you that this show is also brought to you by BetterHelp Therapy Online. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day, or maybe you never skip therapy day. When your schedule gets packed with work, activities with kids, and just life in general, it's easy to let your priorities slip through the cracks. Even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel that you have no time for yourself, your non-negotiables like therapy are even more important than ever. That's where having a good therapist can help you organize your own life. Not only can you figure out what really makes your life better, you can also figure out how to balance it with everything else in your life. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp knows life can be busy and stressful, so it's designed to be suitable for your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here. I want to flip to the defensive side of the ball to talk to you guys about what I think could be coming in the coverage plans. Now, we've talked about the composition of where this defense is going to be when it comes to coverage. The cornerbacks, I think Corey Trice is on the rise. I think Joey Porter Jr. is still going to have a really good year. I think Dante Jackson is going to be a really good pairing with him. Beanie Bishop, Graylin Arnold is a battle at slot corner. Minka Fitzpatrick's your free safety. Deshaun Elliott's your strong. KZ's going to be your extra free safety. I think Ryan Watts has come along and maybe a good backup strong safety and for the long haul as a late round rookie. So like we've talked about the people, but I want to talk about how the linebackers factor into these coverage plans, because you and I know that it's coming, that week one, there's going to be a play where it just naturally happens. A linebacker tackles a wide receiver, or a Steelers linebacker tackles an opposing wide receiver, and someone's like, oh, the Steelers are being stupid and they're putting their linebackers to cover wide receivers again. And, it's part of the NFL game. And it's something that happens to every defense at some point, because that's just what happens. Unless you just run man coverage the entire time, and then you can avoid it and not have to do it, because then you'll always be able to do it. But if you run man coverage all the time, you better have the best of the best cover men, because if you don't, they're going to get torched at some point. And also, offenses are going to figure out ways to counter your man coverage a lot better. So that's why you got to mix in zone. And when you mix in zone, if you have a linebacker on an underneath zone scheme, if they're patrolling the middle part of the field underneath and the wide receiver runs there, that's just what's going to happen. And that's often where people complain about things. But I think that there is a unique situation the Steelers have right now with how their coverage with linebackers could work this year versus how we've seen it really maybe even ever in the Tomlin era. Because there was a time when Ryan Shazier was the primary linebacker. He was like having a safety cover guys. I mean, no one ever complained about Ryan Shazier covering a wide receiver, because you know what? Ryan Shazier was going to lock that dude down. He was going to run with him. That dude was a true specimen at linebacker, and he was a whole different animal. But behind him was still Vince Williams, who was a good linebacker, but not a prime cover linebacker. And, even back in the days before them, Lawrence Timmons was a decent cover linebacker, more of a thumper who was really athletic and could help against tight ends. But again, behind him, unless there was the year with Ryan Shazier when they were on the same team together, the Steelers really haven't had cover linebacker depth the way that I think they will with both Patrick Queen and Payton Wilson. And I'll also say Elandon Roberts is not a bad cover linebacker. Now, he's not a guy you want, have it bumping out in the slot and helping shut down Zay Flowers or something like that. You don't want that, but I think he is much better than people give him credit for helping out in underneath zones and playing smart within the defense. I think Elandon Roberts can do that, but there's no doubt that the athletic skills and traits of guys like Payton Wilson and Patrick Queen give the Steelers unique opportunities with this defense that I don't think that they normally had, especially in the Mike Tomlin era. And I think that what happens here is you have guys that can be legitimate concerns in coverage for offenses to factor in. But all three of those linebackers I've named, Payton Wilson, Patrick Queen, and Elandon Roberts, they can also rush the quarterback. And we've heard more from these guys about how that's part of what they're being asked to do in this defense is they're going to be bringing the blitz back. And I think that that is such a very good thing for the Steelers. For years before TJ Watt and Bud Dupree and Cam Hayward and Stephon Tuitt, before like that group started to emerge again and bring back the Steelers' prowess of being elite pass rushers, the way they got after teams was they blitzed. They would overload certain size, they'd trick you, they'd send heat, and it would just be chaos, and they would get after you. And when they had the right athletes, it worked. But against quarterbacks like Tom Brady, oftentimes when you blitz like that, if it doesn't get home within 2 to 3 seconds, they're getting after you. And sometimes the quarterbacks like Tom Brady, they'll call out beforehand and they'll be able to see it coming, have the protection wired up the right way and be prepared to stuff it so that they do get 4 seconds. And then there's holes in your secondary and your coverage plans. But with this specific group, I think that the Steelers are in a unique position where offenses are going to have a hard time telling what Patrick Queen and Peyton Wilson and Elandon Roberts might be limited to, because I think that they're going to have to respect that especially both Peyton Wilson and Patrick Queen, they're going to be asked to cover a lot this year. Now, I will say this in the first preseason game, Peyton Wilson was in coverage a lot. He wasn't great in coverage. He gave up 4 catches on 5 targets for about 41 yards. Wasn't spectacular there. But again, rookie 3rd round pick, first preseason game. I'm expecting him to get better with each performance, and I wouldn't be shocked with the way that dude works that he's better in this upcoming preseason game. But again, with the way that these guys play and how they rush the how they can rush the quarterback, how they're athletic they are, and how well they can cover in space, I think there's a level of unpredictability that could be in the Steelers defense that could really work in their favor to be turnover creators yet again. Because don't forget also, and I've said this before on the show, Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt are very good at dropping back from their pass rushing and helping in coverage, floating in the right spots. We saw both make interceptions just last year. Alex Highsmith, I think, actually had 2 picks, and one of them was a pick 6. TJ Watt dropped back and intercepted Matt Stafford in a key play that flipped the Rams game around for the Steelers. So I look at those the capability of those 2 guys, as well as the off-ball linebackers like Patrick Queen, like Peyton Wilson, like Elandon Roberts. You see those 3 guys, and I think there's a lot of moving piece type of chess games and chemistry that Terrell Austin has a chance to really do a lot with. And that could make for some exotic looks the Steelers use this year that really confuse opposing offenses, while also allowing them to say, hey, maybe they're coming out and running the ball, but you still got guys who can stuff the run. But they're also out there. They're out there. Maybe they're switching into the pass, and you need guys to cover out there. I think that their capabilities to cover the middle part of the field is going to be a factor that allows the Steelers to be more aggressive with these calls, because say, hey, on a given play, you're rushing, like you have 2 down linemen, 4 linebackers, and 5 defensive backs. So there's your 11. So you're kind of out in like a nickel type look, where Cam Hayward, Keanu Benton are your defensive linemen, Watt and Highsmith are your edge rushers who are outside of them. But then you have Wilson and Queen as your off-ball linebackers, while you have Beanie Bishop in the slot, Porter and Jackson the outside, Fitzpatrick and Elliott as your safeties. So you have all those looks there. But say you want to just rush 4, but you don't want to just rush the 4 of Hayward, Benton, Highsmith, and Watt. Say you want to rush 4 and you want to drop Highsmith back into the coverage, and somehow you factor in Patrick Queen blitzing up the A gap or Peyton Wilson blitzing up A gap, and you do so by trying to overload 1 or 2 specific gaps to challenge the communication levels of these offensive linemen, and do so in positions where it makes it tough to see where the blitz is coming from. Because again, that's where the versatility of coverage linebackers who can also blitz and stuff the run really factor into teams. It's no mistake why Fred Warner is such a huge part of the Niners defense, and why the Niners defense is really good when he's on the field. When you have guys that can do both like that, it forces offensive linemen to have to be very accountable, and also quarterbacks too, to be very accountable with every second of every play. And when you're forcing them to have to think about, is this guy rushing the passer? Is he dropping back in coverage? That's more time they're thinking about that, and less time they're thinking about, oh, let's be in the rhythm of our offense. Let me also worry about Joey Porter Jr. Where's Minkah Fitzpatrick? And again, I think all of this chemistry, this chaos that I think the Steelers are going to be able to drop on defense, which, by the way, do not expect to see that in the preseason. I believe that is stuff that, with the exotic calls I'm talking about and the different looks, that's stuff that's going to flesh itself out over the season, because I think that that's stuff you don't reveal early on, so that opponents can study it too much. But again, I think all of this is being done. The complexity with Patrick Queen, with Payton Wilson, with maybe dropping back Highsmith or Watt in certain positions and overloading, all that's done with the back point, with the reminder in the back of your head that somewhere Minkah Fitzpatrick is patrolling. That's part of what allowed Troy Polamalu to be great. And again, Polamalu and Fitzpatrick, different weapons, different positions. Fitzpatrick more of the center fielding free safety, a lot like Ed Reed, actually. And Polamalu was just the super X factor strong safety that just lined up wherever he wanted to. And oftentimes Ryan Clark would be like, I don't know where he's going, but he's going somewhere. But having that chaos can often free up Minkah Fitzpatrick to say, hey, I know what they're doing. And when what they're doing is to force this point of confusion in the offense, and we know that when they're confused, they go to this guy, or they go to this play, or they go to this route, or this concept. And that's when Minkah Fitzpatrick is the most dangerous, is when he's sniffing out what opponents are doing, and then he's making a jump on the ball. You remember what he did to the Bengals in that season opener? Was it back in 2022? I think it was, when he was like jumping like the first pass of the game that Joe Burrow threw. I think that is what's coming here. And again, it all comes back to how the linebackers are factoring into the coverage plans, the aggression, the blitzing, the fake blitzing to cover. All of that's going to play a big role in the Steelers defense that we'll see play out as the season goes on. But again, today is the last day of Latrobe training camp. We will be out there in Latrobe. If you're there, feel free to say hi. It's been great to see all the fans of the show say hi all throughout training camp. And there's been so many of you. I can't remember everyone's names. That's why I don't say names, because I feel bad, because the people are like, you didn't remember my name. And I'm like, trust me, I remember seeing y'all, and it means the world to me whenever y'all say that that you enjoy the show, and it makes your day better when you get a chance to watch and listen to what we're doing here. So thanks again for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok as well, at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll see you here tomorrow after the Steelers' last training camp at Latrobe, here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.